I'm Chris, and this is
Steve.
we're here representing livefreerealty.com.
Yep. And we had a couple things we wanted to go through and make sure that we brought to your attention. And of course, if you have any questions, you can reach us at livefreerealty.com.
Yeah.
But we do have a questions form. You can reach us there. And of course, we'll get back to you just as soon as we can, get you a good answer, no matter what it is. And even if it's not in our state, we'll do the best we can, try to help you out.
Absolutely. We've been just scouring, trying to find some great information for the consumers out there, and we really think we've been able to interpret it. We think it's going to be very useful for you.
Yeah, and that's actually how you got started doing this, was because you were kind of seeing some of the issues that were going on with, as you bought yourself, and where there's not much information when it comes, especially for investors, which is...
Absolutely, just the lack of really relevant local information. It took me just years. You were working with me for 2.5 years. You represented me when I bought my duplex. And it took a really long time, just because of the real lack of information out there, for me to really feel confident and that I was buying a good property. But we got through it.
Well, even like that term good, it's like, I remember I went abroad, my wife's sister said, she's like, well, would you sell someone a bad property? And I was like, well, what's a bad property? You know, I mean, every property has something for a specific buyer. Like a bad property might not go to a regular customer, but a contractor might be more than happy taking on that, you know.
Yeah,
I feel like
absolutely.
there's so much vocabulary to understand in the industry, and also the difference between the professional and the retail side is huge. And I feel like the more we can get people more comfortable with it, it just makes buying, it's a lot less stressful. I mean, now that you know, if you knew what you knew even before you got into it,
Yeah, absolutely. If the tools that we're trying to develop here now, after both of us just really coming together and pointing out what is lacking for consumers in the real estate industry, I really think that I'm going to be able to use these tools, and Steve knows he's going to be able to with his clients. And we know that you're absolutely going to be able to use them too, once we can really get these out there for you.
Well, what I really love about what we're doing is that a while ago we decided, hey, I've never seen anybody become wealthy any other way than income property. And I felt like, if we could just go in fully committed, and learn and grow with it, that it would be something that would pay off at our age, well before our 40s.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I was looking at a statistic last night that was saying, if you were in your 20s and you could just store $5,000 a year for in an IRA, you'd be looking at about, one that would produce about 7%, which is, arguably a little bit above inflation. That you could get yourself a good $500,000 for retirement, which who knows by the time we get there, whether that's enough. But I just thought, even just if you look at it from that perspective, okay, you got this basic IRA that anybody can do, and it's a very low responsibility means of investing, but at the same time, it's a benchmark. And then you can have real estate where, I've seen, we just did one that was almost 23% cash on cash return on a property. It goes as low as, 5%, but it just depends on what type of investment you're looking for, because not all real estate is really the same. It's kind of, and that's why the stock market is such a perfect model for the financials, where real estate's very fragmented. The more we can kind of bring that together and also, convince people that maybe it's a better idea to invest locally in where you're going rather than investing, globally in the markets that are essentially...
Absolutely. And like you were saying, with the $5,000 a year and the IRA, maybe they project that you could have $500,000 in there by the time you retire. Maybe not. You're putting that money in the hands of a manager, somebody else, somebody you don't know, somebody who's got motivations that you couldn't possibly know, as opposed to if you were taking that same capital and putting it towards real smart real estate investments, then you're in control of that. That property, there's, a few outside factors that are out of your control. But if you do your legwork beforehand and you can use the right tools and really make that property just a smart investment, have a strategy, that $5,000 a year can turn into way more than, I mean, personally, I believe than any return you could ever get from an IRA.
Well, I think what most people are stopped by is that they go, okay, well, you know, I feel comfortable investing 5,000, but when it comes to real estate, maybe I need a lot more. And so I know, I was looking this year, and I know that really to really get into anything, you need about 20,000 down if you're not going to live in it. If you're going to live in the property, it changes everything. But if you're going to buy it as an investor, like you were smart, you bought an owner-occupied, which is a fantastic way to do it. It's just like buying a regular house up to 4 units. There's no difference except for you get paid to live there to a certain extent. Not you bought a duplex, so you have the 1 unit covering. So it covers some of the expenses, but it wouldn't cover everything. Where like a 4 unit might cover almost everything, if not everything.
Absolutely. And now that I've been there for over a year, I've covered the terms of the mortgage for how long I have to stay in the property. Now I'm getting ready to move out. I'm going to rent out the whole duplex. It's going to more than pay for its own expenses, while it appreciates. My
that's
my
just nice thing on the cake.
grows.
Right.
Absolutely, and I have a little bit of extra money in my pocket every month.
And I mean, it's comfortable to invest. I was just actually listening to someone who was talking about, it wasn't really till the 60s that we started to have the stock speculation. They had this big boom. The pre-dot-com bubble was actually like an electronics boom that happened out of Texas. And so Texas had all these, like Texas Instrument and all these companies that were blowing up. And so in the 60s, they started to really, instead of just going for dividend, which would, in our world would be like cash on cash return investing. So that's essentially saying, hey, put this much cash down, how much are you going to get back every year to pay that back? So is it 8%? So maybe it's going to take you, or let's just say 10%, so it takes 10 years to pay yourself back, you know, for your initial deposit. And I think what's fascinating about that is that, like, now it seems like the stock market is just the most rigged and confusing game if you're not a high-end player, if you're not even in. Almost nobody is.
And absolutely, and even if you really do need to educate yourself before you invest in any asset class. But stock market, you really got to educate yourself.
Daily,
and it's still
daily too.
Daily, oh yeah, it's ongoing. You got to pay attention all the time.
Yeah.
And then still, it's still mostly a gamble. Whereas in real estate, even if you make a bad real estate investment, you can still liquidate. You know, as long as you set yourself up with that exit strategy, you know, you may not make the money every month you were planning on making. It might even cost you a little bit every month, but you can still liquidate and get your initial investment back, most cases.
And even if you don't, that's what originally I was so very scared about when it came to real estate investing. And then I found out that essentially a worst case scenario. What's the worst case scenario? Well, you can arbitrage a lot of that with insurances, but at the end of the day, if you are not, you know, and everything goes bad, you're not able to sell it, and maybe the building's going to collapse into itself. Well, what happens at that point? Well, the town just comes and takes it.
Yeah.
You can just walk away. I mean, it's crazy because there are people that, we were talking earlier about slumlords and how to differentiate yourself from a slumlord. Which is essentially someone who's milking the property to death. And that is, you know, it sounds appealing to take that money, but there's always a cost for money now versus money later, and, you know.
And that's your sanity.
Yeah, and it's also the building. When you're buying these buildings and you're not an owner-occupant, you're putting 20% down, you're really using it as a wealth preserver. So you want to have that money tied up in the building, and you want to invest more in it through the pay that you're getting because you're improving it, and then essentially you're not speculating just up because you still got the cash on cash, but you want to make it something that when you do sell it, when you reach the end of the depreciation cycle, 27 years, and you're able to sell it, you've got an even better building than you started with. And that's where all the money I've seen in real estate is someone taking something that wasn't there, as we did with your property. We took a property that it didn't have the foundational code, right? It was 1 inch thick of holding up the whole building.
Exactly.
Opposed to 3 inches.
Yeah,
a little hairy.
The the basement wall was a stone wall and it was concave. It was an 8-inch wall, it was concave 7 inches. So there's only 1 inch holding up the building.
Well, it was
Exactly.
weird because it was an office, but it was really a duplex. And
Right.
they converted it over to an office.
Exactly, which is another thing you can look at too. A great way to make a good investment is to know exactly how you can change the building, right? Because even though I bought a duplex, what I really bought was an orthodontist office.
Right.
An orthodontist office that had been formed out of a duplex before, so really they were selling an orthodontist office, which really adds a lot of niche complexity to it.
Makes it harder to sell.
Which absolutely made it harder for them to sell. And I just had to walk in and say, like, wow, this would be really easy to convert this back to a duplex. And that's where I got such a great deal on the property, was because most people looked at it and said, what the heck do I want an orthodontist office for? That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
But looking at it and saying, I can just turn this back into a duplex very easily, made it a good investment.
Well, I always, people always talk about fighting with people on HGTV. They're watching HGTV and they go, "Can't you get past the paint?" And it's what I realized is after dealing with so many customers, is I realized that it's only people that have the experience in the industry that have that vision, or people that can get past it. Like there's only a certain amount of people that can really visualize what's not there. And so that's why it's so important when you're in the retail sales to make sure you do everything before you list it, because otherwise you're dealing with customers that they can't and they won't. And a lot of them, it just turns them off. And where all the opportunities, of course, is having that vision ahead of time. And there is a little bit of speculation there, but a lot of the stuff is not. It's mostly cosmetic work. We're always looking for the right issues. There are some issues you don't want to get involved with, but it's just really having the discernment to know what's worth it. And I guess we were talking about the stocks, and it's like there's so much involved with that. And what I like about real estate is there's a lot involved with it, but it's pretty finite list. It's not like it all of a sudden it goes from this to this. No, it's pretty finite. You know your worst case scenario, you know your best case scenario, and you usually end up somewhere in between. And you phase out all the work, and you just try to make it work for you and budget it, which we can help with. I mean, between us and the loan officer, we're able to get a really good picture of what's going on. And I think, that's what was interesting with your case, because we originally were looking at single families with an in-law, and we just decided to kind of open it up and see what else worked, because it was your first property. And, I think when most people buy their first property, like I did, I rehabbed the house, and I can't imagine ever leaving the house, even now.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's, a really difficult thing to do at our age. It worked out great for me, but I'd say that was 1 in a million on a good day. So it was certainly, an unusual situation, but it's also that idea that maybe mobility is your freedom, I think, and to a certain respect, because if your job, what's the number one reason, people have to rent? It's because they gotta be mobile for their job. And I feel like this is a way to own and still be mobile and still have the freedom.
And that's one of the things that I discovered shortly after I owned my home, and I had to stay in it for a year, and it was like, this is very similar to renting. My living situation really didn't change at all from renting to owning. And the only thing that really changed, either financially or lifestyle-wise, was the fact that I could no longer move if I wanted to. Where I am, because I bought it as an income property, and I'm going to be renting it out and moving around and stuff still. But for me right now, the thought of buying a single family home and calling it my home and locking myself down to it, that does not sound appealing. I would prefer to have these income properties where I'm renting out to other people and I'm making money off of it, and then their rent that they're paying is going to be able to pay for me to have the freedom to live wherever I want to live.
Yeah.
I'll be able to afford a nice apartment anywhere I want to go.
Right. And then you don't have any of the maintenance. They're paying for their maintenance of those buildings, and then you can rent somewhere nice, and you don't have to go home and do anything. When I go home, all I ever do is fix stuff and work on it.
Absolutely.
And that was definitely the first thing I noticed. Is that there's always
You
something
felt
to
the
do.
same way, yeah.
And I think people are worried about that when it comes to income property, is if it's somewhat more. And I would say it's about the same, with the exception of stuff that, there's obviously, every deal is different, but I don't think it's all that much more until you get to the apartment complex size. As soon as you go commercial, you have different regulations. And apartments are complicated, and there are a lot of people that invest just in single-family homes for that reason. They'll buy an investment home for maybe a similar price, like yours was right around 100, and then they're able to rent it for maybe more, so let's say 10%, so they're renting it for $1,000 a month.
Yep.
And which can work out great because your loan will be less, and it's just a matter of when those homes are vacant, you don't have any other tenants to cover the cost unless you have a bunch of the buildings already. So it's really, I think it's a tough step for that first-time investor to go to a single-family home, because then if you have any shrinkage, you're paying both.
Yeah.
And so we always say keep a 4% reserve, but that's a lot easier to do when you have income coming in to keep that, for any bumps in the road.
Absolutely, and another great thing, where you just said the house I bought was right around 100. Appraised after we did the renovations to turn it into the duplex, it appraised for 200.
Right.
So after the $45,000 in renovations that I financed, I didn't pay for, by the way, I financed.
Yeah, because usually that would be done cash, which is probably the hardest part. But I think it was right about the time you started looking is when they offered that you could get a rehab loan.
Yep.
Which was something we decided to take advantage of, and it was 6 months. I mean, it was a long, because you did it over the winter, and it did take long. Normally it's just 6 months, but you were a little longer than that.
Yeah, I think it took about 8 months for the contractor, because it was a really bad winter that year, and he had.
And they sold the loan.
And they sold the loan. Yeah,
So that's just
2 months after, maybe not even, maybe 1 month after the closing.
So nothing could start until that. And we were going into winter, so it was all things stacked against you, but.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you don't want to work with somebody who hasn't done it before, or even a loan agent that hasn't done it before, because they wouldn't even know this stuff. They've never had it come up.
My point with that was after it appraised for 200, after I did the 45 worth of work, that had me at total 145,000 financed. So I had $55,000 in equity immediately.
Right off the bat.
And out of pocket, in order for me to acquire that house, was right around $6,000. So if you want to talk about any type of instant return, even though it's not a liquid return.
Well, you could take it out.
I could, yeah,
You
very
could
well.
refinance
I
it
could,
out,
yeah, absolutely. I could make it liquid, but what else could you pay $6,000 and immediately have $55,000 available to you?
Right.
You know,
Gaining control
just-
of $200,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's nonsense.